just stepped down from the train.
Welcome back to the Green Connection. I'm glad you were able to join us. A little while back, we did a show with Commissioner Atkinson and Lawrence Doxey with the city, Phyllis Ingalls with VIA, and Mike McClone with Alamo Architects on how our city can become more sustainable and what these various agencies are doing to make that happen. Mike McClone is a senior partner in Alamo Architects, and they were originally located, when I knew them, just right off of South Alamo and Durango Street. About 3 years ago, I believe it was, they decided to take over an old building on South Flores, which was like a ghost town, really, at that time, and took this building and turned it an old, really looking dilapidated truck manufacturing building into something really wonderful and totally 100% green, recycled. It's a perfect building. And it occurred to me that there might be a lot of ideas in what Alamo Architects and Mike McClone and Nikki Miato, who helped them to get the Silver LEEDs certification, which you may or may not know is almost the top. Gold is the top, but this is really good. First building to get that certification in San Antonio, and it's because of all of the energy efficient and all of the various aspects of the building that make it totally sustainable and green. Mike, what gave you the idea to pick up this building? Because I'm sure it wasn't very attractive to begin with.
Well, actually, I had actually looked at this building a number of years ago for another client who opted not to buy it. Our partners in the venture, OCO Architects, and I, both of us were in spaces that were becoming, sort of totally crammed with people. We've been very fortunate to have a lot of success and growth over the last several years, and so we were looking for more of a permanent home that would sort of fit our expanding needs. And then the notions of sustainability, I think, were, that wasn't the reason we got it, but it seemed ideal. I think I said in my last presentation, it's important for architects to not only talk the talk, but actually be able to walk it as well. And so we sort of took it on as a bit of a challenge to sort of try to make as many of the redesign as kind of green as possible.
Actually, you were a pioneer on this South Flores Street, which is now becoming the yuppie magnet, with all of the other buildings being converted into condos or apartments. What year was it, and how do you think that your building was a catalyst for all of this?
We started we bought the property in 2005. We did the design and started construction in 2006, and we moved in February of 2007. Although I'd like to take credit for being a catalyst, I think probably one of the major points is that when the city located the one-stop center, which is at South Flores and South Alamo, I think that provided some sort of impetus for that. And then I think there's a natural process by which cities sort of redevelop themselves and re-energize themselves, and often it happens in parts of town that are sort of dilapidated or underutilized. And this area is kind of a formal industrial hub for the city back at the turn of the last century. And so in many ways, some of the buildings have outlived their usefulness for which they were designed and are kind of ideally suited for, renovation and revitalization.
And so when you started out, did you start out planning to get an award, to get a certification, or did that just sort of happen?
Well, Nikki would probably roll her eyes about this process because maybe we were doing a good job about becoming sustainable, but we really, in some ways, sort of started that process after we started some of the design. Fortunately, we weren't, we weren't starting with a site from scratch, and actually, what we could do is we could actually our initial impetus and concepts were very uniform and applied to green technologies and things from the get-go. And a lot of what we did was really very simple and things that just about anybody could do, either in terms of new construction or revitalization.
So, Nikki, you haven't been with the firm that long. You must have just come in at about that time when you moved.
I've been with the firm about 8 years.
Oh, that long? Oh, but 2 years working on the silver, on the LEEDs.
It took quite a while to do it. I think that just the amount of documentation and process involved with it is fairly substantial.
Did you get LEED certification for yourself?
I am a LEED accredited professional, yeah.
And so what does that involve? Can you take what LEED involves and what you gain from being LEEDs and apply it to an individual?
Well, yes, you can. I think that as far as getting a personal accreditation, it involves kind of setting up, knowing, you know, the fundamentals of sustainability, and that's across the board from materials to energy to, you know, site utilization, things like that. And then really you just take an exam, and that's all it is. But what that does is that helps you understand the process of getting a building LEED certified, and it gives you the ability to sort of walk it through and go through all the checkpoints that you have to do in order to do that.
And do you think was worth the effort to do it?
For myself, absolutely.
Well, for you, yes, but I mean, to get that certification, and then to do it for this building.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, for myself, yes, just because it was a very good learning process, but I would say the same thing for the building also. It was a great learning process for the firm, for just kind of understanding how it works, and now we're a better tool to do it on any other projects that we have as well.
So, and what were the advantages? Not only because you're being environmentally friendly, but I think there was probably some other advantages.
Well, some of the specific things that we addressed with the building, waste management was a very big one. We were able to reuse so many materials on site that the amount of material that we would have taken to the landfill was reduced by about 95%. That's a huge factor. And then, you know, on top of that, we're saving water, we're saving energy, and that saves us money too.
Saving water, how?
Well, we're collecting rainwater from one half of our roof, and then we're also collecting condensate from our HVAC system, and we use that to irrigate our landscape. And then we also have, you know, within the building itself, efficient fixtures, low flow fixtures, sinks, everything like that, and that helps save us also.
And so then the energy side of it.
Well, the energy is, there's a lot of components to that. We have a pretty efficient mechanical system, but more to that, I think we have a lot of passive energy features. All the windows are very, very well shaded, the exposures, so that we don't get a lot of heat gain during the day. However, we do have a lot of windows, which allows us the ability to use natural lighting, so we don't have to turn on the lights during the day. Things like that really help us out.
In using the windows and the natural lights, and does that add to your energy usage very much, or do you?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I think anyone could come in here and say, and kind of, they don't really notice that we don't have the lights on, but if we point it out, you know, they're like, yeah, I guess, you know, you're right. We don't ever turn the lights on for the most part. And I think that probably cuts down on a lot of the usage that we would otherwise need.
So these are lessons that someone who has a house, they don't need a big giant building, could adapt into their own living.
Absolutely.
And actually, quite, you know, one of the most common techniques is in terms of not good lighting is having balanced lighting, which is often easier to do in a small building than it is in a large building. And by balanced lighting, it just means that you don't have natural light coming from only one window. If you can introduce light from one side of the room and also from a second side of the room or a shared space, then it tends to be balanced and light doesn't become glare. Well, the great thing about that is if those windows and those light sources are also operable, now you have an ideal, you know, flow-through ventilation. Cross ventilation is quite common. Of course, that's what buildings have done historically for, you know, hundreds and thousands of years, is allowing all that stuff to happen simultaneously.
The dog run house.
The dog run house is an excellent example. And in our case, we have clear story, a large clear story that runs down the continuous length of our space, which allows light into the middle of a room that's, you know, actually almost 70 feet wide.
What are some of the things that an individual, say, buying an old house and wanting to redo it and reuse, what would be some of the pointers you could give them that they could follow?
Well, I think one of the first things is to give themselves a pat on the back because they bought an old house. So number one, you've already eliminated the amount of lumber that would have to be cut, harvested to build a new house. And number two, you're kind of preserving, probably if it's an older house, it's there's some historical significance, even if it might be minor. One of the things I think it's key in an old house is insulation. Certainly people, 100 years ago, 75 years ago, even 50 years ago, didn't insulate their houses like we do now. So making the building, the envelope, as we would call it, the roof, the walls, and if it's above grade, the underside insulated is really a key. And there are lots of different products that people can investigate about that. If they're taking off the inside of the skin, they can add sort of traditional bat insulation. There are several spray type foam insulations that can be used to actually fill cavities on the inside of the walls. And then the roof really is one of the most key places. Certainly in the winter, that's all where the air goes out, but we recommend typically is not insulating the ceiling plane of the attic, but actually insulating at the roof level, so that if you have ductwork in the attic, that actually it's not working twice as hard because it's sitting around in 120 to 150 degree temperature space.
So actually putting the insulation into
At the
roof
at the roof
rather
level.
than in the attic itself.
Right, exactly. The traditional way was always to put the lid right on top of the ceiling. And if you imagine a two-story house, the air above the first floor, the second floor actually insulates the first floor. It's that sort of transition where, the sun's beating down on the roof. Having a light-colored roof as opposed to a dark-colored roof eliminates some of that. And then I think sometimes older homes, although these are not as flexible as in a new construction, but just the orientation of the house, where's the west, where does the sun set in the afternoon? In the summer, can you provide shading? If you can't have a big deep overhang, is there a place to plant a tree? That create all these kind of very straightforward, we call them kind of common sense approaches to things, can all dramatically reduce the energy consumption.
Well, I have a two-story house, and I built a couple of vacation houses, and are you familiar with Insuldeck?
Yes.
And they use that in all my roofs, and I must say that we don't have any insulation in the attic, but our energy bills prove that it works.
Right. There's radiant barriers that can be used. There are a lot of different things that in and of themselves are not either complicated nor are they necessarily substantially more expensive than, quote, the traditional way of building.
As far as certification, the individual really doesn't need to go after a LEED certification. That's a good formal program to follow, but it's considerably expensive for a single. In fact, right now they don't have. Is the residential program in effect yet? They were working on it.
I'm not sure if it's actually viable yet. I know that they had a pilot program going and they're working on that. You're right, there are some fees that are involved, certainly with the commercial ones. I'm not sure if they're going to be the same for the residential programs or not. In terms of the commercial industry, the LEED program is the most established and the most well-recognized. But for individual homeowners, there are some other programs available. Energy Star has a program, and they have, which is also available for commercial businesses too. You can Energy Star rate your business or your building as well as your home, or you can purchase a home that has been a new home that has an Energy Star rating. And that, my understanding of the program is that the home's energy usage has to beat a certain code standard by, I'm not sure, I think it's 10 or 15% below what the standard is to qualify as Energy Star. That's one way to go. I know that also locally here in San Antonio, the Metropolitan Partnership for Energy has the Build SA Green program, which applies to residential programs or residential projects. And you can
new housing mostly.
New housing, correct. And so you can work with them, and they have a checklist that you can go through and meet several standards in which to get the Build SA Green certification.
And of course, the bottom line is to save energy and to save energy dollars.
Absolutely.
And more comfortable living, and also better air quality.
Correct. There's many aspects to green building which aren't just energy. And like you said, air quality is one, and that has to do with the types of materials that you put into it, as well as how well you ventilate the space and the quality of the air, the quality of the light, those sorts of things. Where the materials come from in terms of their recycled content or if they're virgin materials. The use of the site, how responsibly you use it. Is it, how many trees did you have to cut down, for instance, to put your new home there? And then, of course, water efficiency as well.
Break the table. Okay, we've heard a little bit about what being LEED certified means and how much advantage there is to doing it. I'd like to take you through, or like Mike to take us through and show us exactly how he reused some of these materials.
Okay, glad to do it.
Well, now we're in the guts of the Alamo Architect building, and it's quite impressive. It looks a little industrial, very clean, very bright. I don't see any lights on. I think maybe they're hidden. Anyway, Mike McClone, who was a senior partner with Alamo Architects and was in the very beginning, saw this building years ago and wanted to buy it. He's going to tell us what you can do or how you can apply his methods of recycling into your own homes. Mike,
Okay.
have at it.
All right, I'm going to try real hard to make the industrial building into the home, but a couple of the techniques we did, as Rita mentioned, there were this was an old industrial building, so there were a number of kind of interior mezzanines that had been constructed over the years, and what we did is we actually disassembled all of those, and we reused all the components. All of the old wood decking is actually here behind me, you can see, is actually longleaf pine, which is no longer a species that's available. It's old original growth pine from the East Texas. We basically just ran it through a planer and then used it to sort of clad the central feature in the office and just finished it pretty easily. We also talked a little bit earlier about daylighting and using sort of balance lighting. So we have a big clear story up above us. That's actually allowing light to come into the middle of the room, as well as the light from the sort of both sides, which are the old original garage bay door openings. Originally, the clear story had industrial steel sash windows with some asbestos glazing compound in it. We abated the glazing compound, and then we reused the steel frames for a variety of things. Behind me, they're actually the railings on our stair, and the guard railing on our loft, and we actually used some of the other frames, the few that we had left after we did that. We actually used those outside as the fencing components. So really the lessons learned are take some conventional pieces and reuse them in unconventional ways. We do have artificial lighting in the office. We try to isolate it to basically down lighting so it has very specific purposes. And then we have a series of multi-level fluorescents that are uplights against the roof structure. The roof structure itself was actually, this is the original steel, unpainted with the primer exposed. So all we did was clean it. And we put a new roof deck on because the original building actually had cement asbestos siding and roofing panels on it.
And I notice you have a divider. Let's see, you've got the stair rail and you've got the glass up there. What was that?
That's actually part of that original clear story window frames. We actually took the frames and then just reglazed them with obscure glass. I like to call this essentially shower glass. Some people might have that on their phone, but it's basically just translucent.
And then you've got a structure over here that you said was rusty, and it's an idea that someone could make something look galvanized.
Yeah, actually, there was a paint shop here. This used to be a truck trailer manufacturing facility. And they had a third little building that we use as a storage shed. And we actually took unhinged the doors, brought them inside, put a new structural element, and actually acts as a screen on a reception area. And then actually, there was kind of an irregularly finished piece. So we sort of did, our painter who worked for us is kind of quite a talented guy, so he came up with a faux galvanized finish for it.
And your floors.
This is the original concrete slab from 1948, so it's pretty rough, and it's rough in that it's not smooth like someone's garage would be right now, but really all it has on it is a wax. The great thing about that is you can buff it. Architects are generally pretty rough on floors. We generally have a lot of junk and paper laying around, and so essentially about once a year we just kind of refinish it. And in areas where there are heavy traffic area, you just re-wax it again, so it's not much different than a typical floor.
What's interesting about this floor is, as large as this building is, there are no cracks in it. Obviously, there's no settling.
We were actually pretty surprised. This part of San Antonio has notoriously bad soils. We suspect that because it was designed and built for a light manufacturing, that it probably has considerably more steel. It may very well have piers in it, but we actually had to do nothing structurally to the building whatsoever other than recladding it.
So for floors, you don't really need to stain them. Well, what kind of a wax did you use?
This is just a normal wax. Now, the floor has a patina to it because it's basically 40 or 50
Yeah,
years old.
right.
It doesn't look like a new light gray, cement floor. But this is a standard wax. Actually, we have a guy who used to do our maintenance in our old office who worked for many years for one of the school districts. And so it's just standard wax. I think it's 3 coats and buffed.
Very good. And then you've got, I see a sculpture over here, and those are interesting. The cameraman's going to kill me because it's way over there.
That actually, there were some roll-up steel garage door panels, and those were the last pieces that were left. So we built a storage cabinet, and actually on top of that cabinet is a former, from a project we did about almost 20 years ago in Northwest Arkansas in a mall. We sort of received the old fountainhead as a joke from the project manager. And so we've been kind of carting it around and using it in different places for many years.
Very good. And your wall panels, I see up there, what?
That's Tectum, which is a cellulose product. It's used very often for acoustic purposes. It's literally a spun fiber. It's
it's an
actually very friendly.
insulation too.
It can be an insulation. It was developed a long time ago. It was used originally as roof insulation, but it's used more commonly now as an acoustic property, either fabric cover or not. We often use it. We often use it in schools for acoustical treatments in gymnasiums and libraries and things like that.
Speaking of acoustics, and this is a giant-sized building, it is metal roof, it's concrete floor, I don't hear any noise.
Well, I'd like to think that that's because everyone's so hard at work. But actually, I think part of it is that we have Tectum, that same Tectum panel. We actually have it on the sidewall panels of all the workstations, and then architects. We have a lot of junk, books, papers, rolls of drawings, and I think that tends to kind of absorb a lot of the noise, as it were.
That's one way to look at it. How many employees do you have?
We have, right now, I think we have 54 employees. Some of those are part-time. We have a few students from UTSA. We have, basically everyone sits in an open workstation. I have my bookkeeper and office and business development people they work in as close to what we would call as an office. We have no private offices at all. And we have, I think, 6 people upstairs on the loft.
Okay, I just wondered what is upstairs.
Yeah. Additional workstations. Some of the interesting features that we did outside, and we might.
Oh, and one of the things I like, we have interesting window coverings, which are very operable, and they really blank out the sun if you need to.
They're basically roll-down screens. They're not much different than an old-fashioned roll-down window shade. They have perforations, and we have different versions both in the conference rooms for audio-visual reasons. But they can block as little as 10% of the sunlight to as much as 95% of the sunlight.
And where do you get something like that?
Those
Through an
are
architect?
well, no, not necessarily through an architect. There are several window covering companies actually in San Antonio. I think ours came, I want to say, from the Shade Shop or the Shade Factory.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so they're locally available. Now they're not going to be as inexpensive as a typical roll-down one you might buy at Lowe's or Home Depot. But if you have a specific reason, like you have a west-facing wall or something like that, you certainly might be worth additional investment.
So considered a solar screen then?
It can be. Really, if you're talking about solar gain, you really want to try to do it before it hits the window. In other words, once the radiation is inside, then you can sort of keep it at the window. But the most productive long-term solution for that kind of issue is to try to create some kind of covering, a trellis,
solar screen
a solar screen outside. Think of a roof overhang as basically being a solar screen.
Roof overhang. I noticed over there you have the roof overhang, which is protects, and you've got the light, but then you're protected actually from the glare of the sun
Right.
coming straight on in.
And we looked at that pretty hard in terms of geometries and calculations. That's a south-facing wall. So what tends to happen with the sun is the sun comes up early on a typical, like the summer solstice, which is June 21st. The sun actually comes up north of the east-west line. It wraps around the building to the west. And this was really the concept was to actually keep the sun from hitting the glass. And actually the only time we have any real sort of solar gain issues in terms of like brightness of light is really in the winter when the sun is quite low and it sort of sneaks under the overhangs, actually in the clear story.
Very attractive, too.
Yeah.
And the steel does not, does that bounce the cold and the...
Well, actually, in our case, the interior steel deck that's actually the roof deck, and the insulation is on top of that. On the outside, there's a little gap, so no heat actually builds up between the back of the roof, and it's really not been an issue.
Well, okay, I think what's the square footage of this?
Our gross square footage is around about 10,800.
Well, you've done a great deal of work with dividing it up to hold that many people.
Well,
Or they aren't all here
that's
at
why
one
we
time.
have computers. You just have a small screen. You have big drawings, but little screens. Don't take as much work.
Well, and now I think you did a lot of things that are good ideas for individuals, homeowners, as well as commercial building people outside.
Yep. Let's
Should
go
we take
outside
a
and
trip
take a look.
outside?
We're outside. A couple of things that we've done out here, which we find very interesting and I think have some application for residential, is we reused all of the concrete paving in our project. It was an industrial site. There was a lot of concrete paving. We actually sort of lifted it up, and some of it broke into pieces, and so we kind of call it poor man's flagstone because it's actually just concrete pieces. We infilled with decomposed granite, which is actually a very good material, and although it looks dark, it actually is very reflective, so it helps the kind of issues of a heat sink. And in terms of plant selection, I think is really one of the most important things that people can do, particularly in this region of South Texas and South Texas, which is we don't get very much rain, so you need to specify, drought-tolerant trees, drought-tolerant plants. This zoysia grass that we have, we actually only cut it twice a year. We cut it earlier today, and we cut it once in the spring when it starts to grow, but that's basically it. It does require water, but it's pretty reasonable. We have a succulent, what we call a succulent or cactus garden, and these plants require very little, if any, water. And behind that is actually kind of one of our most prominent features, and that's big concrete slabs that we actually lifted up with a bobcat and tilted them up, and they're actually a fence. And then behind us is a rainwater cistern. We collect about half of our roof water, and we collect 100% of our condensate water, and we use that for irrigation. That's about a 7,000 gallon tank, so it really holds about 7 irrigation cycles. And then some of the other features is you can see some of the steel framing. Those are all reused elements, or they were actually already here when we got here.
The big gold ball?
Well, that came from the Pope's visit in 1987. I'm sure at least 2 of your viewers were here when we were then, but that was part of the site design when he came to visit and gave an outdoor mass. But it's recycled artwork.
Very, very nice.
Okay.
And the exterior of the building is beautiful.
Yeah, we were very fortunate. These great big openings were actually old roll-up garage doors, which we reused on the inside of the building, but they're infilled with very standard commercial storefront, but 1-inch insulating glass, low E glass. So we sort of probably paid a premium for that, but we think it's really a kind of a productive thing. It's really helped with our energy conservation.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about it because you have so many windows.
Yeah, but again, the key is the windows let the light in, but if you can keep the direct sunlight off of that, you're way ahead of the curve there.
So the low E glass is very important.
Low E glass is good, and I think the costs of it are reasonable.
Well, this has been Mike McClone, and we've toured the Alamo Architects building at 1512 South Flores, which is a up-and-coming street in San Antonio. Thank you so much for the tour, Mike. You've been great. It went so fast, maybe we'll come back and get some other details later on. Really appreciate your time. Love your building. And hey, you guys, have a great week and stay green.
The old hometown looks the same as I step down from the train, and there to meet me